This video was brought to you by the lovely members of my Patreon.
A lot of you guys have asked me how I feel about Blaire White over the years, right? And what's so interesting to me about Blaire White is that I see so much of myself in Blaire White. Hey guys, it's Kat, and it's time for another episode of True Tea. I wanted to thank you guys so much for joining me here for yet another episode of True Tea. I appreciate those of you guys who are here every single week, leaving your long, well thought out comments. If you're brand new to this channel, what we like to do on this channel is learn, share, and grow through education and conversation. True Tea is all about sharing how you feel right now. It's about sharing what is true to you in this moment. You might be right, you might be wrong, but either way, you're honest. And that's what True Tea is all about. And if you like to do that, if you like to be part of a thoughtful community that is all about learning, sharing, and growing, I would highly suggest that you subscribe to this channel and that you put that, little notification bell on so you can be here every single week when we make these videos. So we're going to be doing a video about true scum. But before we do that, I would highly suggest you run to your kitchen and grab yourself something to drink. Now, personally, usually I'd be drinking tea, but I'm drinking Cabernet. I'm drinking some Goon tonight. I'm about to go out to a Halloween party. I think I've finally figured out what I'm going to be for Halloween. A devil, how fitting. Let me know what you guys are going to be for Halloween. This might not be what I end up going with, but you know what? It's what I put together for this party tonight. So let me, continue to pre-party and then we can get into this video. So yeah, let me take another sip. All right. So I wanted to talk to you guys about specifically the whole transmedicalist true scum thing, kind of related to the Trisha Paytas video that I did, because some people had some questions about that, and I really feel the need to clarify this sort of stuff, because I feel like if I don't, people are going to continue to get the wrong idea about me. So I'm going to say it once again, even though I said it before, we're going to say it again. So when it comes to my personal position on whether or not you need dysphoria to be transgender, whether or not you need to take hormones and medically transition to be transgender, I am too happy and content in my gender to genuinely give a fuck about how somebody else experiences gender. That is just completely and totally where I'm at. That's where I've landed on right now, and it is how I'm probably going to feel for the rest of my life. I genuinely cannot be bothered to genuinely give a fuck about how other people experience their gender. Now, with that all being said, I've maybe said some things in the past, and I've maybe, made some statements that have made people feel very confused about how I feel about this sort of thing. But I want to make it clear that I definitely 100% feel like you do not need dysphoria to be trans, and you do not need to medically transition in order to be a valid transgender person. A lot of people have asked me over the years, how do I feel about this person's gender? How do I feel about that person's gender? And to be completely honest with you guys, gender is something that is so confusing and makes so little sense that I've personally landed on this idea that I will never understand everybody's life as a trans person. I've got my own perspective, I've got my own journey, I've got my own experiences, and those are my own. They do not negate another person's, they do not define another person's, they only define my own. And to be honest with you guys, one of the things that I've kind of struggled with as a blogger when talking about trans issues is understanding that my experiences are unique to me, understanding that my experiences are my own, that they do not represent every other person's, and that somebody else's transition is not invalid because it doesn't align with the way that I personally experience trans life, right? This is a video that I wanted to make kind of in reaction and response to some of the YouTubers on this platform who have more true scum / transmedicalist perspectives, right? Specifically Blaire White and Calvin Guerra. I watched some of their videos today. I was familiar with them, but I watched them today and I had some thoughts, I had some feelings, I had some positions, I had some perspectives, But I guess before we even really start talking about specifically them, I wanted to say this, right? A lot of you guys have asked me how I feel about Blaire White over the years, right? And what's so interesting to me about Blaire White is that I see so much of myself in Blaire White. I really do. And it's something that's kind of upsetting to observe, because it's like you just see like what sort of person you used to be. Because believe it or not, while today I can say confidently that I do not give a fuck about how somebody else experiences gender, that was definitely not the case not even too long ago. Now, I'm gonna show you guys a mug that I used to sell in my Society 6 store, right? I'm gonna come and show it to you guys, and it's not something I'm particularly proud of, but I'm showing this to you guys just to give you a sense of, you know, where I used to be. So this is the mug, and on this mug, you've got these two fish, right? And these fish are sitting on this like little, you know, they're sitting on this bench, right? And then over here, you've got this brick girl, this girl made of brick, and she's over there and she's uncomfortable, right? And she looks weird. And these two fish are like, oh, you can come sit here, but they don't really mean it, right? If you guys are not familiar with terminology and things like that, fish is a term that some people in the trans community use to describe passable girls, and a brick is the word that a lot of people use to describe a girl who is not passable, right? And here are these two girls, you know, sitting there being bitchy, and they're fish, and they're being like, you can't sit with us. And that was the title of this mug. I used to sell this mug in my Society 6 store. I show that to you guys because that is just a perspective that I used to have. I used to be very much so like, you girls aren't cute enough to be like me. And so So when I see Blaire White, honestly, it's like looking at myself. It's like looking at an old version of myself that has like better equipment and can like actually, you know, like it's weird, it's very uncomfortable, right? So I've never really been somebody who like hates her, because I understand a lot of where she comes from, right? One of the things I think people need to really do, I understand why some people wouldn't want to watch Calvin Guerra or Blaire White's videos, totally get it, completely respect it. But I would suggest that if you're somebody who has been like avoiding watching those videos just because of what you've heard, I would highly suggest watching the videos for yourself and forming your own opinion. I don't know if it's because of my age, I don't know what it is at this point, but like I have a hard time not starting with wanting to be empathetic towards a person's perspective and try to understand how they personally got there. Calvin is somebody who is very, very young, and he is transitioning in a point in life. He has a YouTube channel and a point in his life where he is very, very dysphoric, and he's doing all these things that make sense for him in his transition. And so he has a hard time looking at other people and how they might not have feelings that align with his, right? Both Blaire White and Calvin Guerra kind of have this sort of thing where they believe that how other transgender people present themselves can negatively impact them. Because both Calvin Guerra and Blaire White are very, very, very invested in how cis people see them. They're very, very invested in how cis people perceive them, how they handle them, how they react to them. That is something that is very, very important to them. Cis people's opinions, they hold them up like this. They're very, very, very important to them, right? And so when they see any sort of trans person that's not quite performing gender in the way that they would perform gender, they have to throw them under the bus. They have to say, well, this person is a transgender because they're experiencing gender in a way that I don't, right? I watched a lot of Calvin Guerra videos today, and it was so interesting listening to him watch these videos of these defab people who either idea is male or idea is non-binary, who experience gender in a different way that he does, and hear him say, you know, that because he feels some way, like one of the big common threads with Calvin Guerra is how, you know, these people refer to their chest, right? Calvin is somebody who is very, 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 very dysphoric, right? And because of that, he doesn't like to describe his chest as breasts. And it's interesting because, you know, so I have a similar thing, because just to give you guys a perspective on, and you know, insight into myself, I'm a trans person who has dysphoria. I'm a trans person who used to be so like dysphoric to the point of like, I used to be so dysphoric that I wouldn't leave the house. I used to be so dysphoric that I just couldn't engage with society. And like so much of my sort of life and progress as a trans person has been, you know, me stepping slowly out into the world, me stepping slowly out into society, and you know, doing this sort of thing where I'm inching in and I'm not just jumping in, and I'm kind of slowly but surely acclimating myself, as opposed to just popping in and saying, well, here I am, right? I used to be so afraid of facing the world that I would stay inside all day. I never left the house. And so when you guys see me now being all confident and sure of myself, that was a large progress, right? So I'm saying all that to say that I have I've had a lot of dysphoria. I have way less dysphoria now. I mean, I would definitely say honestly that the dysphoria that I experience now is very minimal to non-existent. It's still just as irrational. It's still just as irrational, but it's not really, you know, something that is debilitating me in the way that it used to, right? And so listening to Calvin and watching him react to, you know, these defab people and their way of expressing gender, and his reaction being so, well, I don't experience gender like this, and so why are they saying? It's like, I totally get where it comes from. And I want to say this, I don't know if it's because of my age or whatever, or just because of the way that I look at things, but I prefer to, instead of jumping down somebody's throat, really trying to understand where things come from their perspective and then treat them with empathy. That's the reason why I've never really been that like completely anti-Blaire White, because I get where she comes from. I understand her perspective. I understand why she's saying what she's saying and the sort of superficial, frankly, gain that comes from it. I get it. I totally get it. So I'm not really mad at her, even though I do see the larger hurt. You know, when I listen to Calvin react to these people who experience gender in a way that he doesn't, I get where it comes from. He's listening to all these people talk about, like there's this one video that he watched, with this person who, you know, was this sort of pansexual, non-binary person, and they were describing their breasts, and the conclusion that they got to was, I'm a non-binary, but I'm a genderqueer person specifically. I'm a genderqueer person who, you know, my breasts are part of my body. These are genderqueer breasts, these are genderqueer overalls, da 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 da. And Calvin had to say, no. That's not how it should be. If you actually had dysphoria, you would feel like this. Those aren't genderqueer overalls or overalls, you know? He had to say all that sort of stuff. And I it's interesting because from where I am in life right now, I would look at this and say, you know what, this person experiences gender in a way that I don't understand. And maybe it's not the same as mine, but that doesn't mean that it's invalid. You know, we all experience things differently, and that is a-okay. There's nothing wrong with having a different experience with gender as somebody. I don't think that that makes or breaks somebody, right? And so I really do solidly land on this position that just because I might not understand somebody's gender does not mean that their gender is not real or not true. Whereas Calvin and Blaire land on this, well, I don't understand this. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't align with my own perspective, and therefore it's not true. And to be honest with you guys, a lot of this is coming from this idea that both Calvin and Blaire have, where what some completely random, unrelated trans person is doing is making them look bad. I want to talk about that. Let's unpack that, right? Let's talk about the whole idea of one trans person making another trans person look bad, right? Now, I talked about this a little bit in the Jessica Yaniv video that I did, because I was really annoyed with this idea that I had to make a video about this person, or me somehow not making a video is, you know, affirmation of what they're doing, right? Which is such a silly thing, you know? Trans people are in this weird position where there are so few of us doing what I'm doing right now that cis people will very ignorantly believe that because one person does something, it reflects on all of us. And in a way, I do think that Blaire's and Calvin's concerns are not completely unfounded, because unfortunately, as trans people, we do in some way live under the thumb of cis people in their opinions and perspectives on us. You know, there is a lot to be gained from being a person who is appealing to cisgender interests, right? Now, obviously I have a perspective on this, and I don't want to sound like an asshole when I say this. I really hope that this doesn't sound like I'm being a bitch or whatever, but I think the thing that makes me so particularly different from both Calvin and Blaire is that I've actually been stealth, you know? I've actually lived in a way where the people around me do not know that I'm transgender, right? Which is, I think, what a lot of I mean, Calvin talks so much about passing, about you know, fading away into being considered a cis person, right? He talks a lot about that. Now, I've been in, and I honestly am in, less so because I've become more of a well-known YouTuber, but there were a series of years where I was interacting and engaging in spaces with people and socializing and all this stuff where people did not know that I was transgender. I have that experience of being stealth. I know what that feels like. I know what that experience was. And genuinely, I think that my sort of I don't care how other people will identify perspective comes from me actually being in a position where I was considered and assumed to be cis, right? I have sort of this whatever attitude because I've experienced what it's like to be taken as a cis person, even though you're not, right? And I don't think that either Blaire or Calvin genuinely know what that actually feels like. I think that they have this goal, but this goal is so, I mean, Calvin Guerra is getting millions of views on his videos. You know, it's very interesting listening to him talk about other DFAB people and how they're expressing their gender and how, you know, for example, a DFAB person referring to their chest as breasts, how that's something that, you know, a trans guy just wouldn't do. Do you know what I was doing when I was Calvin Guerra's age? You know what I was doing when I was Calvin Guerra's age? Not trying to get videos that got me 1 million views because I was so invested in being stealth. At 18, 19, 20 years old, all I wanted to do was be unseen, to disappear into the background, to fade away into being assumed to be a cis person. That was my goal, that was my focus, that was my dream. That's all I wanted in life, was for people to not assume that I was trans. That was my only focus in life, you know? And so when I listen to Calvin sort of say, well, if you felt this way, you wouldn't do this, this, and this, in the back of my head, I'm thinking, well, if you were a person who was actually invested in self, you wouldn't be making YouTube videos. You wouldn't be, you know, doing all of this shit. You would be so much against this idea of being known as a trans person. Now, I understand that for some people watching my videos recently in the past couple of months, you might not understand the true growth that I've had on here, but it's actually taken me years to be truly comfortable with this idea of being known as a trans blogger, because I think as a part of my dysphoria and a lot of other stuff, I'm so uncomfortable with people just knowing that I'm trans. I'm so uncomfortable with that, especially as somebody who has been stealth, right? That is sort of my weird default, right? I'm not comfortable with people absolutely always knowing that I'm trans. And it's taken me a while to get to that point, right? And so as I'm listening to Calvin talk about how his experiences and how his gut dysphoric reactions are so different, you know, to other people, I'm thinking to myself, but wait a minute, you're not very invested in passing. You're not very invested in stealth, because if you were, you wouldn't want to be known. You know, you wouldn't want to be a known commodity. You wouldn't want to be a trans blogger. You would want to be this totally unknown person making videos on the internet, you know, to like 20 people. You know, that's what you would want to be. But again, like I said in the very beginning of this video, I'm not going to use my own experience with dysphoria and with gender to negate or validate somebody else's. That's just not what I personally believe in, right? But you know, it was an interesting thought to have. Now, one of the other reasons why I want to talk about this is because apparently recently Natalie did a video with did a video where she featured Buck Angel, who has apparently come out and said some very transmedicalist, true scummy type things. You know, when it comes to Buck Angel, I feel like people need to get, and like, so here's the thing when it comes to actually, so here, I'll do an aside really quickly, and I should have said this earlier, right? Honestly, and this is just me speaking really frankly, when it comes to both Calvin Guerra and Blaire White, I don't think that they're nearly as bad as some people think they are. Blaire does not like me. Blaire White doesn't like me, okay? Which is whatever, it's fine. It's cool, girl. I don't hate her. I don't hate her. She doesn't like me, and it's whatever. I think it's because of just the way that we're positioned on the internet. But I see Blaire White, and again, I see myself. I see like an old version of myself that makes me cringe a little bit, but I understand it and I kind of respect it. I don't agree with it. I don't think it's right. I don't think it's helpful. It sucks that she's so well known, right? But I get it. right? I do get it, right? But I will say that if you're somebody who's avoiding both Blaire White's videos and Calvin Garrett's videos because of what you've been told about them, if you have the heart, if you have the spoons, if you have the soul, I would encourage you to watch their videos, because at the very least you'll understand why you don't like them. You know, I've never really been a fan of people who just blindly hate shit, but just blindly disagree with shit because you don't actually know what it is and isn't, you know. I watched a video, this will surprise you if you're not so into those people. I watched a video where Blaire and Calvin both laughed at a trans exclusionary radical feminist. They laughed at TERFs, right? So I know that some people that might seem like it's breaking away from your narrative of them. But I watched a video where they both laughed at this TERF who made a video about a trans woman peeing on the floor, right? That's a perspective that I think some people wouldn't assume that they had, because of just some of the other things that they say. But both Blaire White and Calvin Garrett also laugh at trans exclusionary radical feminists. Now, maybe for different reasons, maybe from a different perspective, but I'm just putting it out there that that's how they personally feel, right? Where was I going with this? I forgot how I was talking about Buck Angel, we got there, but that I would say that, right? When it comes to Buck Angel's older, okay? And I know that some people don't get this, but Buck comes from a time where it was a lot harder to transition than it is now. It was a lot harder to transition than it is now. I mean, Buck Angel started his transition during a time where there was no legal path for a trans person, right? One of the interesting things about this conversation, and I talked about this in a couple of videos, is that I've personally seen the shift in how we discuss transgender people, right? Buck Angel transitioned during a time where, again, there was no legal path for him to transition. And so I look at a lot of his like anger towards non-binary people, or even binary trans women. And I understand that it comes from a place of him being formerly in a position where he is fighting really hard to be validated by these cis people in the way that a lot of you know, trans people do. But he transitioned in a time where there was more at stake. He transitioned at a time where it was really physically dangerous for you to transition. And so now he's observing how much easier some people have it, you know, how much easily somebody could walk into a doctor's office and get access to hormones. And he's kind of having his reaction, because back then when he transitioned, things were a lot harder. Things were a lot more complicated, right? And so his reaction is, I put in all of this stuff, I dealt with all this shit, I went through all this bull crap, and now these people can just walk in and easily get it. And you know, and part of me actually understands where he comes from with that. You know, when I was younger and I was looking into trans stuff, right? When I was looking into transitioning, especially hormones, right? There was a whole process you had to go through. You know, recently I don't know if I've talked about this on my main channel yet, but the beginning of this year, I got back on hormones. I had been off of hormones since I was about 24 years old. And recently I got back on them. I'm not gonna get into in this video. Maybe I'll do a whole video about hormones, but I got back on them after being off of them for quite some time. And it was really interesting for me to have how I used to get access to hormones, like the contrast between how I used to get access to hormones and how it is now is like night and day. You know, when I was younger in the early 2000s trying to pursue hormone intervention in my transition, I had to go to several therapists, I had to get a letter, I had to be qualified, I had to do all of this stuff. And this is in California where things are still fairly easy, before getting to a hormone doctor who I could then get a letter from to change my gender marker, right? When I went to get back on hormones, right, I literally walked into a clinic, said, hey, I'm trans and this is what I want to do. And I was given hormones pretty quickly, right? I was given hormones pretty fucking quickly. I've talked about this intimately in a couple of previous videos, but some of you guys know that one of the things I had to do in my past because I wanted to take hormones was I had to do sex work. I did sex work and it was a very traumatic experience for me because I wanted to transition. That was something that I started because I wanted to transition, and it was upsetting, it was hurtful, it was painful for me. And I did it, I got my money and I was able to pay for my hormones, and here I am today, right? But when you contrast that versus the walking into a doctor's office saying that I'm trans and getting hormones, I can understand how some people can get upset. I can understand how some people, upon understanding that that's where we are now, can get upset. Now, when it comes to this argument in general, right? And this is really the important thing in this video, right? One of the big reasons why I am not a transmedicalist or a true scum is that I understand that for me to be 19 years old with no employment opportunities in 2009, right, where we were not nearly as conscious as we are now in 2019 about trans shit, right? For me to have to be in a position where I felt like I was forced into sex work, that was unethical. That was wrong. That was not a good and positive thing. I don't want to live in a world where trans girls are pressured to do sex work to pay for hormones. I don't want to live in that world. I would much rather live in a world where you can walk to a doctor and say, hey, this is who I am, this is what I want to do. And you're informed about what can happen on hormones. I would rather have a more open approach to this than a closed approach to this, where you got to do this. You got to. First of all, you have to have money for a therapist that's going to co-sign that you deserve to be on hormones, and then on top of that, you have to have money to pay for the hormones, right? I'm very, very thankful that I never went through that process. I mean, I won't get into, maybe we'll do a whole other video, but I did black market hormones, which honestly was more expensive than actually doing it the quote right way, but that was my experience, and I don't want anyone to have to go through that. I don't want anyone to have to go through trying to figure out the right dosage through a Yahoo group. I don't want anyone to have to do that. I want for trans people to be able to have access to care. And so for me personally, having more of an openness towards who gets to receive care, what kinds of people get access to care, I think that is only going to be a positive thing for transgender people in general. For Buck Angel, who came from a time where he transitioned so long ago and things were so different, I almost kind of understand it. I don't agree with it. Buck Angel has said some disgusting things. Buck Angel has outed trans women. He has done a lot of really terrible things. He's been incredibly trans misogynistic, and I'm not gonna argue against that, right? But I understand where he comes from. For people like Blaire and people like Calvin, it's not quite the same thing. Blaire and Calvin are frankly dealing with, to be honest with you guys, they're frankly dealing with all of the benefits that have come from previous trans people breaking the fucking rules, breaking the rules and saying, hey, we're valid, and actually fighting for their right to be able to have access to care, right? And I think that as time goes on, as we move forward as a society, I do believe that frankly, we're all more well served by having an openness that doesn't require trans people to put themselves in uncomfortable positions to make enough money to prove to a cis person that they're transgender. I do not think that is the way. Like I said, both Calvin and Blaire are very invested in proving themselves to cis people. And if you guys haven't picked up on this in previous videos, that I've made it, that have kind of referenced this, I don't think that the solution for trans people rather is to appeal to cis people and their lack of understanding of gender. I don't think that that's helpful. But both Blaire and Calvin really do work within this sort of idea that if they explain their gender in a way that is satisfactory to cis people, they'll be accepted, they'll be loved, they'll be embraced. And I get it. It's a very wishful, honestly, it's wishful thinking. Listening to Calvin talk about his gender, he'll say things like, yeah, I maybe do have female chromosomes and maybe I am female, but my brain is male. Right? My mind is male. He'll say stuff like that, which to him makes sense. That's like a rational, reasonable thought to him. And the thing that's so interesting to me about listening to Blaire and Calvin talk about this shit is I can tell in the back of their mind, there's a magical explanation that they can give cis people to where they will accept and embrace them. Well, they'll actually agree with them, right? And I know this sounds pessimistic, and I know that it sounds not very positive, But the realization that I've had doing content like this for over a decade is that most cis people will never give a fuck. They will never care enough to actually understand you and validate you and see you in a way that is actually indifferent from the cis people who share your gender. They're never going to do that. But I think both Calvin and Blaire are very invested in this idea that they will. They're very invested in this idea that if they're the right kind of trans person, cis people will accept them. And to some degree, I don't think that they're totally wrong. I mean, it is definitely true that there are some cis people who, if you give the right story, if you say things the right way, they absolutely will validate and, you know, they will absolutely support you and your gender, right? But that's all very conditional support, because if they need that justification, if they need to be convinced, that means that there are certain qualifications that you must uphold, you must appeal to these different things. And the moment you don't, that is the moment that you become just another cross-dresser to them, you know? And it's just not, in time, it's, again, the difference I think I have between both of them and myself is that I've actually been stealth. I know what that feels like. And I know that it's not the best place to be. And that it's so, like, the moment, like, I've been stealth and I've been outed. I've talked about this a couple times on my channel. I've been outed a couple of times in my life where I was stealth, somebody outed me, and you just see how quickly that all crumbles, right? Are there going to be people who see you as valid because they've accepted you as a woman and and even though they now know that doesn't change? Sure, totally, absolutely. But really what we should be fighting for, and this is the big point I wanted to make, is not just acceptance of yourself, but acceptance of all of us. Because I know that in our minds, we view each other, like, I'm a very binary, dysphoric trans woman, right? It's very easy to say, you know, that I am one of these girls. It's very easy for me to say, well, look, I'm this good trans girl right here. I'm not like this, you know, I'm this good one, right? And are there people that will accept this version? Yeah, totally, 100%, not ever gonna deny that, right? But to a lot of cis people, we're all the same. We're all the same, you know? Fish or brick, we're all the same, you know? And because of that, understanding that after being stealth, understanding that after being in this, that only made me want to fight for all trans people, not just some trans people, not just trans people who perform their gender in a similar way, but all trans people, because I don't think that we're liberated until we're all liberated, right? And so that's just personally how I feel. That's just personally my perspective. Again, I think I have a very different one because of just my experiences and things like that, but it is what it is, right? So again, I don't believe that you have to have dysphoria. I don't believe that you have to transition medically. I might not understand a lot of people who don't have dysphoria and don't transition medically. I might not get that because your gender is not this similar or comparable to mine, but that does not mean that it is not valid. And I want to make that super clear, right? So that's how I feel. That's my perspective. I think that part of liberating trans people is liberating all trans people, not just the ones that appeal and look like cis people. So yeah. Anyway, that is how I felt about this. I felt like I would make a video like this, so I would love to hear what you guys have to say. So please be sure to bring me your true tea in the comment box below. And if you managed to watch this entire video, please put this emoji rather in the comment box below. I would love to see that you've watched this entire video. Anyways, right now you are looking at 2 videos that you can watch if you would like to continue to sip true tea with me. And in the corner up there, you can see various ways that you can send me a tip if you are interested in doing that. If you learned something from this video, I always appreciate and support and love a tip. So yeah, anyway, I will see you guys next week and see you next Tuesday. Bye.